My mom figured she could swap out my dad for her creepy new boyfriend and even make me call the guy Dad, but she had no clue I was still secretly in touch with my real father. I was 13 when she got engaged to a man named Caleb. Dad had been convicted of manslaughter only 5 months earlier. That night, he called someone at the bar, but he hadn't even been drinking. I was right there with him. He stepped into the restroom, and when he came back a few minutes later, his face was pale and he was smeared with blood. He yelled for someone to call the police, and they showed up fast, but without a single real explanation they cuffed him and hauled him away. The next time I saw him, there were bars between us. It never added up in my mind. My dad never had a violent streak. He swore he was innocent. And the way Mom behaved after the trial only deepened my doubts. Almost overnight, she brought Caleb home. On the very first day she told me he was my new dad, claiming my real father was a monster and warning me to stay away from him for my own safety. At first I didn't know what to believe, but when 5 months later Mom announced she and Caleb were engaged and I'd better start calling him Daddy, I became more certain than ever that Dad had been framed. That's when the next nightmare began. Caleb started getting way too comfortable around me. He'd stare while we ate, slow and deliberate, and say things like, "You're growing up so fast, becoming such a pretty young woman." The worst part? Mom thought it was sweet. The first time I told her Caleb made my skin crawl, she brushed it off and said I was being dramatic. She must have mentioned it to him, though, because that night, while she slept, Caleb came into my room. He grabbed my wrist so hard it left marks and hissed, "You know what happens to naughty girls who snitch." I was terrified and knew I couldn't trust Mom, so I kept quiet. Around then I started a different secret. I began writing letters to Dad, hiding them inside my textbooks and mailing them from a friend's house after school. He wrote back through the prison email system to an account I'd set up without Mom knowing. Things hit a breaking point one Thursday. I came home from school to discover Mom had changed my last name on all my school records to Caleb's without even telling me. "You'll thank me when you're older," she said. That night Caleb came into my room to celebrate us becoming a real family. He sat on my bed, put his hand on my thigh, and said I should be grateful to have a dad who cared. I shoved him away and locked myself in the bathroom until he left. I wrote to Dad about that, and the reply I got back was on real paper. Parts of it were damp and see-through, like he'd cried while writing. That nearly broke me. The only thing keeping me going was the chance to see him. His birthday was coming, and I begged Mom to let me visit. I told her I knew she hated him, but it was just for one day, just a few minutes. Please. But of course she said no, and what she said next was worse. That very weekend, Caleb had tickets to a car show and wanted us all to go, insisting on adjoining hotel rooms. When I said I'd rather visit Dad, Mom exploded. "He's a killer. You're not visiting a murderer," she snapped. When I told her he was innocent and still my father, Caleb slapped me across the face while Mom just watched. They forced me to go on that trip. And while I was sleeping, the worst happened. Caleb staggered into my room drunk, and this time he didn't stop at touching my thigh, his hand went further. I'd never felt so filthy and humiliated. The ride home felt endless. And then, to top it all off, the week we returned, Mom found the letters I'd hidden from Dad. She burned them in the backyard. As punishment for secretly staying in touch with Dad, Mom yanked my bedroom door right off its hinges so she could monitor me. Caleb, of course, treated that like an open invitation. Most nights he'd just stand in the doorway, silently watching me sleep. That was a breaking point for me. I felt exposed in a way I can't even describe. The next day I slipped into the school library after hours and poured my heart out in an email to Dad. I must have typed for a solid hour, rambling so much it probably read like nonsense. I wasn't even sure what I expected from it, or if I wanted anything at all. I was too numb. 2 weeks later, a long reply arrived. Dad wrote the kind of words a kid desperate for comfort needs to hear, promises that everything would be okay. But one line grabbed me. "Did you check what I said?" I frowned at the screen. "Check where?" I went back and reread every single email he'd ever sent. That's when I saw it, something I'd missed before. In a recent message, Dad had told me to go up to the attic and look behind the radiator. I remembered skimming that note the morning after I'd begged Mom to let me visit him, but I'd been too heartbroken to notice. The moment I found it, I made a mental promise. I'd go as soon as Mom and Caleb left for their next date night. Sure enough, the following week they went out. My hands trembled as I climbed into the attic with a flashlight. Behind the radiator, wrapped in plastic, was a journal. I flipped to the page Dad had marked. It was dated weeks before his arrest, his handwriting unmistakable. "It's been a few weeks since I caught Sophie and Caleb sneaking off into the bar. I don't know how to confront her." Shock rippled through me just as the crunch of tires on gravel made my blood run cold. They were home early. Maybe the restaurant was too crowded or they'd argued. Whatever the reason, I heard the car doors slam and Mom's heels click on the walkway. My heart pounded as I hugged the journal to my chest, scrambling to decide what to do. Caleb's heavy footsteps started up the stairs, each creak of the old route jarring me like a gunshot. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the flashlight, its beam jittering across the dusty boards. I shoved the journal under my shirt, the leather cool against my skin, and edged toward the attic opening. Too late. Caleb's head appeared in the hatchway just as I reached the ladder, his dark eyes locking onto mine. He held my gaze for a long, unsettling moment, then climbed the rest of the way up, his broad shoulders barely squeezing through. I pressed myself against the wall, feeling the rough boards dig into my back and the journal hard against my stomach. He slowly scanned the attic, the floating dust, the shifted boxes near the radiator, like he could read every move I'd made. "What are you doing up here?" he asked, voice calm but laced with something that made my skin crawl. I forced myself to sound steady. "Looking for old stuffed animals. From when I was little." He didn't buy it. I saw it in the way his jaw clenched, in the subtle flex of his hands. He stepped closer, and I caught the sour mix of wine on his breath and the expensive cologne Mom loved, but that always made me feel sick. "You're a terrible liar," he said softly. "Just like your father." The words hit me like a slap. Then he grabbed my arm, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise, and yanked me toward the ladder. With my free hand I clutched the journal tight against my body, praying it wouldn't slip from under my shirt. Mom stood at the bottom of the ladder with her arms crossed, one foot tapping out a sharp rhythm. She looked more irritated than worried and demanded to know why I was creeping around the house like a thief. Caleb kept his hand clamped around my arm as he told her I was probably hiding something. There was a dark flicker in his eyes that made my stomach knot. I panicked and blurted out that I was only looking for my old teddy bear because I couldn't sleep without a door on my room. The excuse spilled out too fast, too desperate. Mom rolled her eyes but seemed to accept it, probably too tired to start a bigger fight. That night I waited until their snores filled the house, Caleb's deep rumble mixing with Mom's soft breathing. The old walls settled with the usual creaks while I slid the journal into my pillowcase, the corners pressing into my cheek as I lay down. I didn't dare read more. Caleb's shadow kept showing up in my doorway every hour like clockwork. Saturday morning felt unreal. Mom made pancakes and hummed off-key to some song on the radio, as if nothing had happened. The normal routine turned my stomach. Caleb sat across from me, staring, following every move I made while I pushed food around my plate. I excused myself to the bathroom, journal hidden under my arm, and wrapped it in a plastic bag I found beneath the sink. The water was icy on my skin as I carefully lowered it into the toilet tank. On Monday I slipped into the empty computer lab during lunch, telling my friends I needed to finish an assignment. The only sounds were the low hum of the old computers and the tick of the wall clock. I began photographing every page of the journal with my phone, angling to dodge the harsh fluorescent glare. My hands still shook, leaving some shots blurry. The entries stretched back years. Dad's handwriting grew more frantic as time went on. He wrote about seeing Caleb's car parked on our street at strange hours, about Mom growing distant and cold. One entry described finding a motel receipt in Mom's purse when he was just looking for gum. Another told how Caleb would show up at the bar during Dad's shifts, lurking in a corner booth like a predator studying prey. I uploaded every photo to a cloud account under a fake name, heart pounding as the progress bar crept along. Then I deleted the pictures from my phone, double-checking until I was sure they were gone. I knew Caleb had started rifling through my things more often. When I got home that afternoon, he was waiting in my room. He sat on my bed like he owned it, the place torn apart. Drawers emptied, clothes scattered like fallen leaves, mattress flipped, even my old jewelry box dumped and tangled. "Where is it?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I tried to look confused, heart racing. "Where's what?" He didn't buy it. He grabbed my shoulders and shook me hard enough that my teeth clacked together. "I'm not stupid," he hissed. "I know you found something in the attic." Mom came home just then, her keys jingling as she called out a casual hello. She paused in the doorway, eyebrows rising as she took in the wreck of my room. Before I could speak, Caleb's whole demeanor flipped like a switch. He smiled, one of those fake smiles that never reached his eyes, and said he was helping me reorganize my messy room, that I'd asked for his help. Mom believed him without hesitation, probably because it was easier than asking hard questions. That night at dinner, Caleb made his big announcement. They were moving the wedding up. Instead of next year, it would happen next month. He said he couldn't wait any longer to make our family official. Mom squealed like a kid, clapping her hands in excitement. I stared at the great chicken on my plate, feeling sick. Over the next few weeks, Caleb tightened his grip on my life. He mounted a camera in the hallway aimed right at where my bedroom door used to be, its little red light blinking like an evil eye. He started driving me to and from school, cutting off the bus rides with my friends. He'd wait in the parking lot, engine idling, watching every person who came near me. At night he'd take my phone and leave it on his own nightstand, just out of reach. But during the day, I kept working in secret. I printed pages from Dad's journal at school and taped them behind old textbooks in my locker. I needed help, but I didn't know who I could trust. Teachers seemed clueless. My friends wouldn't understand. Then I remembered Uncle Miles, Dad's best friend since high school, the kind of man who shows up before you even ask. Mom had banned him after Dad's arrest, claiming he was a bad influence who encouraged Dad's violent tendencies. I knew that was a lie. Miles was solid and kind, always smelling of sawdust and carrying butterscotch candies in his pocket. He worked construction and had 3 kids of his own, twin boys and a little girl who called me her big cousin. I found his number buried in an old address book Mom had forgotten in the kitchen junk drawer, hidden under expired coupons and dead batteries. During PE, the next day, I slipped outside to the payphone, pressing the cold metal receiver to my ear. I told the teacher I felt sick and needed air, clutching my stomach for effect. Uncle Miles answered on the 3rd ring, his gruff voice softening when I said my name. I talked fast, words tripping over each other, telling him I needed help, that Dad was innocent, that I had proof. He told me to slow down and breathe, then said to meet him at the public library after school the next day. If Mom asked, he'd say he saw me walking and offered a ride. His calm, steady tone was the first comfort I'd felt in weeks. Caleb was suspicious when I said I had to stay late for a group project. He peppered me with questions, who was in my group, what the project was about, which teacher assigned it. When he called to check, my history teacher backed me up, probably annoyed to be interrupted. I practically ran to the library after school, my backpack thumping against my spine. Uncle Miles was waiting in the parking lot in his old pickup, the red paint faded but freshly washed. He looked older than I remembered, with more gray in his beard and deeper lines around his eyes. In the truck, I showed him the photos of the journal entries on my phone, swiping quickly through each one. His face grew darker with every page, his knuckles widening on the steering wheel. He muttered that he'd always known Dad's arrest was wrong, that the story had too many holes, too many convenient details. Then he asked if I still had the physical journal. I told him where I'd hidden it, and he nodded with quiet approval. Uncle Miles told me we needed more than just Dad's suspicions, we had to find real evidence, something solid that couldn't be ignored. He knew a few people who'd been at the bar that night and thought maybe they'd noticed details the police never bothered to ask about. Over the next 2 weeks, we met at the library 3 more times. Each meeting felt like something out of a spy movie, different routes, constant glances over my shoulder. Miles tracked down Graham first, the security guy on duty that night. Graham was huge, with gentle eyes and a memory like a camera. He remembered Caleb being there, which was strange because Caleb had told the police he spent the entire evening at home watching TV. Graham said he'd seen Caleb slip into the bathroom about 30 seconds before Dad went in. But after Dad was arrested so quickly, Graham stayed quiet, scared to get involved and even more afraid of Caleb, who seemed to have connections everywhere. Next, Miles found Vivian, the bartender. She had bright red curls and a sharp memory for faces. She recalled Caleb hanging around for weeks before the incident, always asking about Dad's schedule, pretending to be friendly. She thought it was odd but never suspected anything. People asked about regulars all the time. Vivian remembered Caleb ordering a whiskey neat that night and then disappearing for a while before the body was discovered. She was the one who called 911, her hands shaking so badly she could barely dial. The real breakthrough came when Miles talked to Lucas, the bar's longtime manager. Lucas mentioned they'd upgraded their security system a month before everything happened. The police had taken only the main camera footage, but there was a backup system that covered the hallway to the bathrooms. He still had those files on an old hard drive collecting dust behind liquor invoices. We went to Lucas's house to watch the footage. His living room smelled of stale coffee and cigarettes. My stomach twisted as he plugged the drive into his laptop. The timestamps told the story. 9:48 p.m. Caleb walks into the bathroom, calm as ever. 9:52, Caleb walks out, checking his watch, smoothing his shirt. 9:53, Dad enters, probably just needing a quick break after his shift. 9:54, Dad comes out covered in blood, shouting for help, his face pure shock. 4 minutes alone for Caleb, plenty of time to set up a frame job. Miles copied the footage onto multiple USB drives with steady, deliberate hands. He said we had to be careful. We couldn't just hand it to the police. Caleb might have friends on the force who owed him favors. We needed an airtight case first. He told me to act normal at home, to hide any hint that we knew something. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. But somehow Caleb sensed it. Maybe I wasn't as good at pretending as I thought, or maybe he was just paranoid. One night he came into my room and sat on my bed, the mattress sinking under his weight. The hallway camera couldn't catch him from that angle. His voice was almost casual as he said he knew I'd been meeting Uncle Miles. Someone had seen us at the library. Then he added, if you don't stop whatever you're doing, your mom might get hurt. Accidents happen all the time. People fall downstairs. Cars have brake problems. Gas leaks. The threat landed like a cold stone in my chest. I forced myself to stay calm, breathing evenly even as fear gripped me. At our next meeting I whispered everything to Uncle Miles, even though we were alone. He said we had to move faster. He'd already contacted Dad's lawyer and shared what we'd found. The lawyer was impressed but careful, insisting we also needed the original journal. Uncle Miles said the original journal would seal the case, it would prove the photos weren't doctored. I promised I'd get it, even though the thought made my stomach turn. That night I stayed awake until 3 a.m., watching the red numbers on my clock crawl forward. Finally, I crept to the bathroom, my bare feet silent on the carpet. The journal was still safe in the toilet tank, the plastic wrapping dry and tight around it. I slipped it into my backpack, tucking it deep into an inside pocket. When I opened the bathroom door, Caleb was standing in the hallway like a shadow. What are you doing up? He asked, eyes glinting in the dark. I feel sick, I said, pressing a hand to my stomach. He stared for a long, heavy moment before stepping aside, and I could feel his gaze burning into my back all the way to my room. The next morning my backpack was gone. I found it in the kitchen, its contents spread across the table. Caleb sat there with the journal in front of him, flipping through it like it was a comic book. Mom hovered beside him, her face pale and confused. Caleb's voice was smooth and full of lies. He told her I'd been writing disturbing fantasies about him, that I was unstable and needed help. He pointed to specific entries. Look, she's trying to copy your husband's handwriting, he said. See how she writes about you and me together? This is her twisted story about breaking us up. Mom's confusion hardened into anger. She said she was disappointed in me, that making up stories about Caleb was sick. I tried to explain it was Dad's journal, but she wouldn't hear it. She insisted I'd forged the handwriting because I couldn't accept Caleb as my new father. She said I needed therapy, maybe even a special boarding school. Caleb jumped in, suggesting his cousin ran one in another state, strict and isolated, good for troubled teens who lie. The way he said it made my blood run cold. It felt like the walls were closing in, the room spinning. At lunch that day I spotted Uncle Miles's truck in the school parking lot. I climbed in and broke down, telling him everything. He said not to worry, we still had the bar footage. But when I got home, my phone was missing from my backpack. Caleb had it. He dug through every file until he found my cloud account and guessed the password in 3 tries. With a smug grin, he made me watch as he deleted every journal photo, jabbing the screen like he was crushing an insect. He said Uncle Miles's copies wouldn't matter without the original to verify the handwriting. Any decent lawyer will call the photos fake, he said. The bar video's different, timestamps don't lie, but handwriting? Easy to forge. That night Mom told me I was leaving for a special boarding school on Monday. She said it would help me overcome my delusions about Caleb. No phones allowed. No outside contact for 6 months. 1,000 miles away in the mountains. I realized this was Caleb's plan to silence me without leaving a trace. Saturday morning, while Mom was grocery shopping and Caleb was in the shower, I grabbed a bag and slipped out. The sound of running water covered the soft click of the front door. I ran straight to my friend Ashley's house and borrowed her phone to call Uncle Miles. Ashley's mom was at work, and Ashley promised to cover for me. I told him about the boarding school, voice shaking. He told me to pack a bag and meet him at the library in an hour. But when I got back home to grab my things, Caleb was already waiting on the front steps, his hair still damp from the shower. Caleb must have realized I'd been gone. He yanked me inside by my hair, my scalp burning with every pull. Mom wasn't home yet. He slammed me against the wall hard enough to knock a picture frame to the floor. You've ruined everything, he snarled. I worked too hard to let a bratty kid wreck my plans. He started talking fast, almost bragging. He said Dad deserved to rot in prison and that he'd been planning it all for months before that night at the bar. Mom, he claimed, was easy to manipulate, so desperate for attention after Dad started working 2 jobs to pay off the mortgage. I forced out the question burning in my chest, why had he called that man into the bathroom? Caleb laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. That guy was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, he said. He explained how he'd gone in to plant a bloody knife he'd brought from our kitchen, already smeared with Dad's fingerprints. But the drunk man had walked in, asked questions, gotten too close. So I had to shut him up, quick and messy, Caleb said, almost proud. When Dad came in minutes later, it was perfect. The blood was still fresh. Dad tried to help, tried to stop the bleeding, and in doing so got his own prints all over the scene. Caleb pocketed the real murder weapon and left a different knife behind, one that couldn't be traced to him. What he didn't know was that Ashley's phone was recording every word from the pocket of my hoodie. I'd hit record before I even stepped inside. Caleb kept boasting. He said he'd worn gloves, studied the bar's schedule for weeks. Getting Dad out of the way and marrying Mom was just smart business, he said. Mom had good life insurance from her hospital job, and, as he put it, I'd be worth even more in Social Security benefits if something happened to her. Maybe a car accident, he mused. Maybe a fall. Maybe she just gets sad and takes too many pills. That's when the front door opened. Mom had come back early, she'd forgotten her wallet. She heard everything. Her face went paper white. The grocery bag slipped from her hands and oranges rolled across the floor. Caleb spun around, realizing too late what he'd done. He tried to backpedal, claiming he'd only been angry, that he was trying to scare me straight. But Mom had heard enough. The veil was gone. When Caleb stepped toward her, she backed up, reaching behind herself. "Get out," she said. He smirked. "You're overreacting." Mom grabbed a kitchen knife from the block and leveled it at him. "Leave, or I'm calling the police." Caleb laughed. "You wouldn't dare. Too much scandal. Too much shame. What would the neighbors think?" But Mom's hand stayed rock steady. "For the first time in months, I saw the mother I used to know, the one who fought off nightmares and kissed scraped knees." Caleb finally understood she was serious. His expression shifted, the mask slipped completely. He grabbed his keys and wallet from the counter but paused in the doorway. "This isn't over," he said. "I know things about you, about the affairs before you married him, about the money you stole from his savings for shopping. Go to the cops, and I'll destroy you." Then he slammed the door so hard the windows rattled and the remaining pictures crashed from the walls. Mom collapsed onto the floor, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. I knelt beside her and played the recording from Ashley's phone. She listened to Caleb's confession, her face crumbling more with each word. "I'm so sorry," she kept whispering. "I was so stupid. I failed you. I failed your dad." I told her we needed to call the police right away, but she hesitated, terrified of Caleb's threats, terrified of losing everything. So I called Uncle Miles. He arrived within minutes, bringing the bar footage on a USB drive. We sat Mom at the kitchen table and laid out everything. The screenshots of Dad's journal entries, the security footage showing Caleb's every move, the notarized witness statements Miles had collected. When Mom realized she'd been sleeping beside Dad's killer, planning a wedding with him, she ran to the sink and threw up. Finally, she nodded and said we'd call the police. 2 detectives arrived not long after. They were calm and professional, offering Mom tissues and speaking gently to me. They listened to Caleb's recorded confession again and again, watched the bar footage on our laptop, and carefully bagged the journal as evidence. One detective admitted they'd had doubts about Dad's case all along. The forensics never quite added up, but the pressure to close the investigation had been intense. Caleb's confession tied every loose thread. That night they issued a warrant for Caleb's arrest, but he was already gone. His apartment was emptied in a hurry, his car missing. The police told us not to worry and stationed a patrol car outside our house. Mom and I didn't sleep. We pushed the couch against the front door and sat in the living room with every light on, jumping at every creak of the house. The next morning, Uncle Miles called. Through his construction buddies he'd heard that Caleb was holed up in a motel 2 towns over, trying to pay cash for a room. Police moved fast. By noon they had him in custody. He tried to run, but didn't get far. In his trunk they found a locked box holding the actual murder weapon, the knife he'd used that night. It still carried traces of the victim's blood deep in the handle. The knife left at the scene had always been a decoy. Caleb tried to bluff. He claimed I'd faked the recording with AI and that Mom was lying to protect me. But the evidence crushed every excuse. The bar footage showed him entering the bathroom. His fingerprints were on the real knife. The wounds matched his height and reach, not Dad's. Finally, faced with everything, Caleb broke. He confessed, taking a plea deal. He admitted to framing Dad, manipulating Mom, and even revealed other crimes in other states, victims who'd been blamed for things he'd done. The detective said he was a serial predator who'd been getting away with it for years, always targeting vulnerable women with children. Dad's lawyer filed an emergency appeal. With all the new evidence, a judge quickly ordered Dad's release. After 8 long months in prison for a crime he didn't commit, Dad was finally coming home. Mom and I drove to pick him up. The car was quiet except for the soft music on the radio. Mom kept dabbing at her eyes, crying silently. I couldn't speak, my throat felt tight with everything I wanted to say. When the prison gates opened and Dad walked out, he looked smaller, thinner, his hair more gray than brown, but when he saw me, his eyes lit up. I ran straight into Dad's arms and hugged him tighter than I'd ever hugged anyone. He smelled different, like industrial soap and something heavy and sad, but he was still my dad. He held me close and cried into my hair, whispering how much he'd missed me and how he always believed I'd uncover the truth. Mom stood a few steps back, wringing her hands. Dad looked at her for a long moment before saying they'd talk later. Right now, he just wanted to go home. The drive back was quiet, broken only by Dad's small, almost normal questions. How was school? Had I grown taller? Was my favorite restaurant still open? They were classic Dad questions, but after everything, they felt anything but normal. When we got home, he stood in the doorway like he was trying to memorize every detail. The house felt strange without Caleb's junk cluttering the shelves. Mom had tossed out everything he'd touched, leaving bare spots on walls and counters. Dad wandered through each room slowly, running his fingers over furniture and picking up picture frames Mom hadn't replaced yet. That first night was awkward. He chose to sleep on the couch even though Mom offered their old bedroom. I woke around 3 in the morning and found him in the kitchen, making coffee with trembling hands. We sat together in silence until he finally asked if I was really okay. I told him everything, every awful detail about Caleb. He listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening as I spoke. When I finished, he said he was sorry he hadn't been there to protect me. I told him none of it was his fault. The next few days blurred into meetings with lawyers and endless paperwork. Dad's attorney pushed to have his record fully cleared, not just overturned, and talked about compensation for wrongful imprisonment. Dad brushed it off. He didn't care about money, he just wanted his life back. Mom kept trying to talk to him, trailing after him from room to room, but he wasn't ready. He'd answered her questions with single words and found excuses to leave. Caleb's trial was set for 6 months out. The prosecutor said with his confession and all the evidence, he'd likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. They'd even linked him to 3 other murders in different states. His pattern was always the same, frame someone close to the victim, then insert himself as the grieving supporter. The detective told us we were lucky, other victims hadn't survived to expose him. I went back to school, but everything felt off. Kids whispered when I passed. Everyone knew about Caleb and Dad by then. Ashley stayed by my side, and a few true friends stuck around, but I hated the pity. I didn't want to be a headline. I just wanted normal, but normal was gone. Dad started working construction with Uncle Miles. He said the physical labor helped quiet his mind. He came home covered in dust and sweat, but he seemed calmer each day. He began seeing a therapist who specialized in wrongful conviction trauma. He didn't talk much about the sessions, but I could see the difference. He stopped flinching when a door slammed and stopped checking the locks over and over. 2 weeks after Dad came home, Mom moved out. She rented a small apartment across town, saying she needed space to figure herself out. Honestly, I was relieved. The tension when she and Dad were in the same room was suffocating. Even if Caleb had manipulated her, some betrayals can't be undone. She asked if I wanted to stay with her sometimes, but I told her no. I needed to be with Dad. A month later, the divorce papers arrived. Dad signed them without even reading, he just wanted it finished. Mom gave him everything, the house, the car, and full custody of me. Her guilt was eating her alive. She started therapy too, trying to understand how she missed the monster right beside her. Sometimes I felt a flicker of sympathy for Mom, but then I'd remember how she chose Caleb over Dad, how she refused to believe me, and any softness I had for her disappeared. Uncle Miles became a regular presence at our house. He brought his kids over on weekends and we'd grill in the backyard like old times. His 8-year-old twins, Elijah and Adrian, adored Dad. They didn't care about his past, they just loved that he could throw a perfect spiral and tell funny stories. His daughter Clara was my age, and we bonded fast. She knew what it was like to have a family flipped upside down. Her mom had left when she was 10. 3 months after Dad came home, I had to testify at a pretrial hearing. The prosecutor said my words would help keep Caleb from claiming insanity or coercion. I wore my nicest dress, the blue one Dad gave me for my birthday 2 years ago. My hands trembled as I swore to tell the truth. Caleb sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, looking smaller than I remembered. He tried to catch my eye, but I stared straight ahead. I told the court everything, the threats, the touching, the night at the hotel. When I described finding Dad's journal, I broke down sobbing and the judge called a recess. Dad wasn't allowed in the courtroom, he might be called as a witness later, but Uncle Miles was there. He gave me a quiet thumbs up from the gallery, reminding me I was brave and that I could do this. Caleb's lawyer tried to trip me up, suggesting maybe I'd misunderstood his intentions. I stayed calm and repeated the truth exactly as it happened. Then the prosecutor played Ashley's recording. Caleb's face went gray. That afternoon his lawyer asked for a plea deal, 25 to life instead of life without parole. The prosecutor didn't hesitate, no way. Reporters swarmed us outside the courthouse, shouting questions about forgiveness, about moving on, about seeing Caleb in chains. Dad shielded me with his body as we pushed past them to Uncle Miles's truck. We said nothing. This wasn't entertainment. It was our life. Mom started sending letters, long, rambling apologies about how she'd failed as a mother and should have seen the signs. I read the first few, then began tossing them unopened. Dad said forgiveness might help me someday, but I wasn't ready. Maybe I never would be. She'd chosen a monster over her own family. Some things can't be undone. Caleb's actual trial was brutal. The prosecution called families of other victims, laying out his pattern again and again. A woman from Arizona described dating him after her husband died in a suspicious accident. She broke it off when she sensed something dark, likely saving her own life. Another family from Nevada spoke about their son, still in prison for a murder that sounded eerily like Dad's case. The prosecutor said they were reopening that investigation too. Dad testified on the third day, wearing the suit from his wedding, the only one he owned. He talked about finding the body, about trying to help, about the shock when the police arrested him. He spoke of the months in prison, missing my birthday, writing letters he never knew if I'd read. His voice cracked when he talked about the day I was born and how he promised to always protect me, how he felt he'd failed. On the 5th day, against his lawyer's advice, Caleb took the stand. He tried to cast himself as a victim, claiming the man in the bathroom attacked him first. But under cross-examination, his story unraveled. He contradicted himself, grew angry, and finally showed the jury who he really was. When asked about his plans for Mom and me, he refused to answer. Even his own lawyer looked defeated. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours. Guilty on all counts, murder, conspiracy, fraud, attempted assault on a minor. The list went on. The judge handed down life without parole, with consecutive sentences for each charge. Caleb didn't flinch. He just stared at the table. As the guards led him away, he looked at me one last time. I met his gaze, steady and unbroken, making sure he knew he hadn't won, and never would. After the verdict, Dad and I went to his favorite little Mexican restaurant, the one that still had his picture on the wall from back when he was a regular. The owner hugged him and said dinner was on the house. We ate mostly in silence, both exhausted but relieved. It was finally over. Caleb would spend the rest of his life in prison, and we could start rebuilding ours. The next week Mom tried to come by. Dad spoke to her through the screen door but refused to let her in. She wanted to apologize again, even suggested family counseling. Dad just shook his head. That ship has sailed, he said. She cried and pleaded, but he stayed firm. I watched from the stairs, feeling nothing. She'd made her choice, and now she had to live with it. I started therapy, too, with a woman named Dr. Isla who specialized in trauma. She helped me untangle the knots in my head and kept reminding me none of it was my fault, that I'd been incredibly brave. Some days I believed her, some days I didn't. But gradually the nightmares faded. I stopped checking the locks over and over. Stopped flinching when someone walked too close behind me. Progress came in small, quiet steps. Dad and I built new routines. Sunday breakfasts at the diner. Wednesday movie nights. Helping Uncle Miles with weekend projects. We talked more than we ever had, about school, friends, the future. He helped with homework, even math, which was never his thing. He came to every school event, cheering way too loud at my not-so-great clarinet performances. Little by little, we were learning how to be a family again, just the two of us. 6 months after the trial, Dad started seeing someone. Vivian, the bartender who testified at the hearing, began stopping by. At first she was just a friend, then something more. She made Dad laugh real laughs, the kind I hadn't heard in years. I liked her immediately. She never tried to act like my mom, she just treated me like a person. She'd bring takeout and we'd watch cheesy movies, making fun of every plot hole. Whenever she was around, Dad's smile came easier. Mom eventually stopped trying to contact us. Ashley's mom mentioned she'd moved to another state to start over where nobody knew her story. Part of me hoped she found some kind of peace. Part of me didn't care. She'd been so quick to replace Dad, so blind to Caleb's evil. Maybe Caleb saw that weakness from the start, maybe that's why he picked our family. A year after everything, Dad received a settlement from the state for his wrongful imprisonment. It wasn't millions, but it was enough to pay off the house and start a college fund for me. He bought a new truck, took a vacation to the mountains, and finally started living again. But he kept working construction. He said he liked the honesty of it. You either built something right or you didn't. No lies. No manipulation. That spring I turned 15, and Dad threw me a huge party, probably making up for the birthdays he'd missed. Uncle Miles's family came, Vivian came, even some of my classmates showed up. We had a bounce house, ridiculous for teenagers, but nobody cared. Dad grilled burgers and told embarrassing stories from when I was little. For a few hours, we were just a normal family having a normal celebration. After everyone left, Dad and I cleaned the yard together in comfortable silence. He thanked me for believing in him, for never giving up. I told him I always knew he was innocent, that he could never hurt anyone. He hugged me tight and said I'd saved his life. We both cried a little, good, healing tears. Life moved forward. I made honor roll and started dating a nice guy named Rory from chemistry class. Dad threatened to clean his shotgun when Rory came over, but he was mostly joking. Vivian moved in after a year, bringing her cat, Mr. Muffin, who immediately claimed Dad's favorite chair. We became our own small, slightly odd family, bound by shared trauma but held together by choice and love. 2 years later, a letter arrived saying Caleb had died of a heart attack in prison at 43. I felt nothing. I simply folded the letter and went back to my homework. When Dad asked if I was okay, I told him, yeah, I really am. Caleb had been dead to me since the day they sentenced him. His actual death was just paperwork. For my 18th birthday, Mom sent a card. No return address. Just a short line, love, Mom. I kept it, tucked away in a desk drawer with other things I couldn't quite throw out. Dad said that maybe someday I'd want to find her and make peace. Maybe he was right. Or maybe some bridges are meant to stay burned. Time will tell. I earned a full scholarship to college and decided to study criminal justice, maybe even become a lawyer and help other families torn apart by lies. At my high school graduation, Dad cried so hard it embarrassed me in front of everyone. Vivian snapped a million photos while Uncle Miles's family cheered from the bleachers. They were my chosen family, the ones who stood by me when everything collapsed. The night before I left for college, Dad and I sat together on the porch swing, watching fireflies blink in the warm darkness. He told me he was proud of me, that I'd become an amazing young woman despite everything. I told him I loved him and that he was the best dad anyone could ask for. We stayed there in easy silence, no more words needed. We'd survived the worst and come out stronger. That was enough. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I hadn't found Dad's journal that night. If Caleb had managed to send me away. If Mom had married him. If Dad had died in prison thinking no one cared. But I did find it. I did fight back. And sometimes that's all you can do, fight for the truth and hope someone listens. For us, someone finally did.